Topping Talks. 105 hours a week, can't be beat. Welcome to Topping Talks. Topping Talks is a Topping Tribune production, and today's episode is proudly sponsored by Topping Technologies and ExpressVPN. Topping Talks is also on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and Stitcher. Topping Technologies is an IT value-added reseller and services company with a special proficiency in security. Heck, I see their founder at least twice a day. Have to say, quite handsome and brilliant. If you're a business in Texas, it can use a hand. You can reach us at sales@toppingtechnologies.com. Also, are you part of the 3.6% of Americans who still care about their privacy? If you are, then perfect ExpressVPN can assist. Even though 96% of stats are made up on the spot, ExpressVPN does give a 100% guarantee via their 30-day back money guarantee. Now, without further ado, today I'm proud to say I'm interviewing Lex Green, who is the IT director for the Libertarian Party of Texas. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Absolutely. So I know, kind of winding back the clock a couple of years, how do you first get into IT, or what first got you hooked onto the IT bugs, so to say?
Oh, well, do you want to go way back to the beginning?
The origin.
Well, because I'm old enough to remember the whole evolution from the early days when everything was relays and even before that. I got involved first in high school because I was in a rock band, and that got me interested in the electronics and instrumentation. We had to solder our own cords and make sure our amps worked, and try to fix our guitars and so on. That got me started, and then as time went on, my brother went into electrical engineering in U of I, and he would tell me all the things he was learning, and then I went into an apprenticeship to be an electrician at the Eureka Company, and I would tell him about all the neat things I saw in the factory, and we'd compare notes, and everything kind of evolved from there. Like I say, starting with simple wires carrying signals to relay banks in machines and process controls, all the way up to the computers that control stuff today. And so I've watched the evolution for quite a few years.
That's awesome. So was that the Eureka Vacuum Company?
Yeah, that's where I started in 1977, 6 or 7, somewhere around there, as an apprentice electrician. And at that time, they were an old company, so they had a lot of old machinery. The machinery had either relay logic, which means banks of relays would turn on valves and motors and so on, and read the switches to understand where the process was that it was controlling, or else we had tube electronics that controlled things that were more analog in nature. So, for example, if you have an oven and you want to check the temperature, you need a feedback sensor, a thermocouple or something. That then would have to go to an analog amplifier, which at the time, I know in the 1970s there were plenty of solid-state stuff, but in the older companies there were still plenty of tube electronics handling all that. So,
oh, no way.
Yeah. So there was a lot of, and Eureka was very interesting in that they did so much of their own in-house stuff. They start with raw steel and then cut it to dimension for shafts for the motors, and then they wound their own motors, and they would and then large presses to stamp the shells that made the covers for the at the bottom of the vacuum cleaners, and the tubes that made the handles that they put through benders and so on. All of this was, like I say, that was where I learned. At the time, I guess it was kind of like simple computing.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, I mean, so few companies do that nowadays, especially. I mean, with the global market, you got components coming from all over the world by 50, 60, 100 different manufacturers to make one product. It's amazing they were able to do it all in house back then.
Yes, yeah, it was, and it was kind of nice to to see that, because then when I see things today, I say, oh, I know how that's done.
Yeah.
Where the average person, even somebody in my position today at a factory like at Toyota or GM or someplace, they're getting a lot of this stuff shipped in already done overseas or in small shops somewhere else, and so it's
a different process.
Yeah, it's neat to have seen all that stuff. Absolutely.
It's like, I know a lot of those companies, they rely on Bosch and a couple of those other large international companies for all the components that go into them. And I think last time I was reading a book on Tesla, they had the highest percentage of in-house manufactured components to actually go into the car, and it's because when they were making it, it was revolutionary at the time.
Right, and but there's an advantage to that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The whole economy veered the other way for through the 90s, the 2000s, and
decades.
2010s. They worked more and more to outsourcing, and now they're realizing that you don't have control over your supply chain, and like you say with Tesla, they need specific things.
Yeah.
So now we don't buy off the shelf; we buy very specifically from ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And that gives you a little bit more freedom and independence, where if you needed to do a very, very specific thing, you can't get pushback from someone you're not working with. You just tell a team, we're going to do it. Let's make it happen. And let's, work together to overcome any obstacles that might be in our way, make something revolutionary.
Right. So anyway, at Eureka was the first place I ran into computers being used for control of the machines.
Like what kind of computers were they?
Well, they're called programmable logic controllers, or PLCs. They're the standard control for industrial processes. I told you that most of them were, if they were digital in nature, turn on a motor, turn off a motor, turn on a valve, turn off a valve. That was all done by relays. And some of those control cabinets were huge. I mean, literally some of the boxes I would go into to troubleshoot would have 1,000 relays.
Really?
And they're all hand wired. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like, imagine, the designing and then the building of the panels, and then some poor sucker like me coming along and saying, oh, something's not working. Now let's trace, look at the prints and trace through 10 different relays to find out which contact is not working or what relay is broken or et cetera. It's just, it was a lot of fun. So then they came up with this idea called programmable logic controlling. I think the first ones were Modicon, although the first ones I saw were Allen Bradley, and that Allen Bradley is probably the giant in the industry, or at least was before I retired.
Yeah.
That was neat because instead of wires snaking all through a panel, you would see dozens of wires going to a terminal strip on a electronic card that plugs in, and then you would see a bank of electronic cards with all these wires connected to the terminal strips.
Really?
Yeah. So there would be, hundreds of wires all hooked up to these banks of electronics, and then there was a microprocessor at the heart of it. Matter of fact, the first Allen Bradley had like 4 or 5 plug-in cards just for the processor.
Really?
Yeah.
So was the processor split up, or was it 4 different processors? Or
Well,
what was that like?
There weren't too many microprocessors around at the time, and those that were needed lots of support in terms of I/O chips and other types. I mean, if you've ever looked at a computer board today, take one of those integrated circuits, probably performs 5 or 6 functions that back then was put onto a single plug-in card. The card being, maybe this big, plugged into a pretty good butt-sized box.
Oh my gosh!
And then you'd have, the racks of wiring, and all of that then took the place of those relays. And some of it was inputs. So the first one I ran into, they had tons of what we call limit switches, or switches that would detect the position of a device out on the machinery. And it had, I'm not sure how many, but dozens of them. So all of those were wired into an input card. And then there were valves that turned on to indicate or to initiate some process, usually steam moving somewhere or hydraulics, for example. The first one was pneumatic, so it was all air valves. And then there's also lights and switches, the start button, the stop button.
Oh, yeah.
And the power lights, and all these are wired into those input-output cards. And at that time, I was just a dumb electrician. The engineers wouldn't let us touch the programming units.
Really?
Yeah. Until they got in over their heads, because it was new tech, and nobody knew what was going on. Eventually, we got in there and said, "Hey, well, we can help figure this out."
Yeah.
And so,
what was the most difficult thing usually when you're troubleshooting those types of complex systems?
It's a matter of understanding basic logic, and it helped because I had already, I mentioned that I had gotten involved with electronics with my brother, and we got involved with some of the early computers and early computer programming. So I was able to take basic programming techniques, like, for example, if then else.
Yeah.
That was something that was foreign to most people in the industry at the time. But at the same time, if you think about it, if the start switch, then turn on the start light. I mean, it's that simple. And that's how the programming went in there. So then it was a matter of, if you're troubleshooting, then say, okay, well, this is the outcome I'm looking for. Now go back through and look for the input. Now, in the relay case, it was a matter of tracing wires, relay to relay to relay. In the case of the programmable controllers, then you ended up with a program. It was like an interpreter program that interpreted something we call ladder logic. Old electricians understand a ladder logic because that was a representation of the contacts on the relays or the switches and the coils or outputs, the coils of a relay or of a valve or the actual light. So the ladder logic then was being used in the programmable controllers, and it was really easy for me. I could read the prints and say, okay, this should be on.
Yeah.
And find out why it's not on. The nice thing about electronics using the PLCs is you didn't have contacts breaking down because they were virtual contacts. They were virtual. There was just a bit.
Yeah.
It was Boolean logic turned into a relay analogous type thing. So I could talk about PLCs for an hour if you want to.
That's awesome. So what kind of challenges, or what was it like going from Eureka in that type of factory environment to going to Caterpillar, where you're working on even more ginormous machines?
Yeah, that is interesting because both companies were old companies. Eureka had started in the early 1900s. Caterpillar, I'm not even sure when they started. They may even predate that. But Caterpillar was interesting in that they did a ton of in-house engineering. Even though we did all our processes in Eureka in-house, the engineers relied on going out to outside suppliers to get the technology that they needed. And so machines would come in finished, ready to do their jobs. Whereas with Caterpillar, their engineers designed their machines. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
That's incredible. So a lot of when you say the machines, is it all the robotic arms, or all the machines that help support the assembly line process and the process of making the parts for all the machines they make?
Yeah, it's kind of hard for the average person to grasp, but if you look at a Caterpillar tractor, a D10 or a D9, try to imagine that all of that at the beginning was just raw metal that had been delivered in the form of sheet metal or blocks of steel, et cetera, and that it had to be stamped or machined or otherwise shaped, welded, and then assembled. So when we say what processes, what I did at Caterpillar when I first started there was in the forging shop. you know, they have the crawler tracks.
Oh yeah,
what they're famous for.
Yeah, it looks
well,
like
there's
tanks.
links that hold each of those together that have a hole on either end, so a pin pivots. So as that goes around, it supports the tracks. Well, those things come in basically as a bar of steel. Depending on which tractor you're making, it could be a 3-inch square or 4 or 5-inch or 6-inch square bar of steel. And it goes through a shear, which shears it off into bars, a length of a certain length, you know, from raw to, let's say, a foot long. Yeah. And then it would go through ovens. That's some of the analog processes where they would heat those to 2,300 degrees more or less till they're glowing orange. And then it would go through a stamping press, which would stamp the basic shape. Then it would go through another press that would punch the holes on either end. And then it would have to go to machining mills that would cut the holes to a specific diameter and cut the edges where it connects to the tracks to a flat surface. And then the holes were drilled and tapped. That's all just for
that one component.
Just for that one component.
That's a lot.
Now look at all the components in a tractor, a Caterpillar tractor. Imagine all of that stuff has its own sets of processes all tied together.
Oh wow! So and then you were helping support all the machines on that whole assembly line.
Yes.
Was it segmented from the rest of the factory network, or was it like an independent ecosystem, or do they all talk to the other parts of the factory?
Kind of.
How did that work?
Yeah, that's interesting. There were 2 sections in the building that I worked in when I first started, and one had 4 or 5 lines that was all just the track links, and they ranged from the D4 tractor up to the D11, which is, again, those I think were 6-inch square bars that were going through, but they all had the similar process: the shear, the heat, the punch, and so on. But then there was another section at the other end of the building, and that was all powdered metal pressing, which is a whole nother process altogether. And I'd never seen it before I went to Caterpillar. Yeah, that's where they take steel metal in the form of a powder, and they pour it into a mold, and then a hydraulic press presses it down and makes it a shape.
Really?
Yes, and most of what I remember were hydraulic manifolds and fittings. So where the hydraulic pipe connects to the hydraulic pump on the tractor, there's a hunk of metal with holes for the pipe to go through, and then bolt holes to hold it down, so it had, you know, plenty of strength. And then they'd run those through 1,600 degree furnaces to make the metal strong and of a certain hardness.
Oh my gosh!
And then they go to a bank of CNC machines to drill some of the final holes to exact tolerances, and so that was all in one building. That was compartmentalized, so there was 2 processes set up in that building. There was some more other areas that I worked in too, but that was the main thing. Now, if I went to the next building over, there they were working on. I'm trying to remember the next building over was final assembly for the tractors. The one after that was where they welded the bodies. You know, you get these huge hunks of steel that is the body for the tractor, and they would run through these machining centers that would, you know, just hog out tons of metal. But they also had welding, a ton of welding going on in that building. Most of that was manual, but they were going increasingly to
have machines do it.
Machines do it.
Yeah.
Then I left Caterpillar and went on. So
they make some general. I think I was reading a couple months ago. Just fun facts, like the largest truck in the world was made by Caterpillar at one point. Like, you know, it was for the mining, where the wheel, just the wheel of the Caterpillar was taller than like a NBA player. Yeah, like, it's astonishing the sheer size and magnitude of those machines. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine all the R&D and all the stuff that goes into, you know, making the engines and all of that. I mean, it's astonishing. Were the mechanisms for controlling the assembly process and the technological support and electronic support, was that similar to Eureka in terms of, or was it kind of on a whole nother level? Because I know it was a little bit more in the future.
Uh, it was mostly the same, but yes, it was at a slightly different level. At Eureka, when we brought in a PLC, it was dedicated to a specific machine and a specific process. At Caterpillar, several of the production lines that I described at the beginning, they had a single PLC or a supervisory PLC, and then it modified everything or monitored everything on the line, and so it was capable of not only knowing when any machine in the process was down, also controlling the process, and it would also report and even print out reports to management to let them know what was going on. So,
Oh, cool.
yeah.
And what was your favorite part about working there? Or maybe a fun challenge that you came across?
At Caterpillar,
yeah.
Well, it was the challenge was just learning new stuff. I've worked in about 6 different factories, and each factory had something different processes, and therefore different controls. There was a lot in common, like the PLCs, for example, but there was, what their requirement, what the pieces you put in a car, for example, when I worked at Mitsubishi, are different than the videotapes when I worked at Tandy, different than the tractors when I worked at Caterpillar, and so on. So each one of those, some of them were the same types of machines, just different scale. Instead of making a 2-inch part, we're making a 3-foot part, or and that has its own challenges. But so.
And then what was it like going over to Mitsubishi? I mean, that's one of the largest automotive companies on the planet. They make some really cool stuff.
Yeah. That was very interesting because they brought over technology from Japan, which really wasn't too much different from what we did, but it had a little twist to it.
Okay.
But when I started there in what they called the body shop or the weld shop, and it was an area where they take all the pieces that had come out of the punch presses in different shapes, and they would weld them together. And as they went down the line, more pieces were added until eventually, at the end of our production line, they came out the shape of a car. There were no wheels, engines, or anything. It was all, it hadn't been painted yet, but it was like I say, it went from small pieces to big pieces to full bodies.
Yeah.
And we had, at that time, I'm guessing 300 or 400 robots in there.
Oh,
and
wow.
They were all Japanese robots. So we got to learn those. And that factory opened in 86, I think. But I didn't start there until 90. So they still had older robots. I say old robots. In 1990, they were old robots. So that very similar to what I was talking about with the PLCs at my first job. These had lots of circuit boards in it. It wasn't just, here, let's put a PC on it and control everything, which they probably could have. Instead, there's a different circuit board for every function, and robots is really, it's kind of like a CNC machine where you have multiple axes. It's just with every robot there's 6 axes. Yeah. And so all you're doing is you're saying, okay, move your motor until you get to this spot. Except I'm moving 6 motors until I get to a common spot or a spot that I want it to be. And then,
that sounds like a lot of programming. If each robotic arm or each robotic robot has 6 different motors inside of it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. How did you guys go around programming that? Do you have a central computer you can log into, or do you have to go to each machine and tweak it? And obviously you have to tweak it individually to the specs, but do you have to control them all individually? What was that process like?
Well, all of them that we worked on had a pendant, and each pendant had a motor control for every axis. But they also had modes for controlling multiple axes together. So I could say, move one that makes my arm go up and down, or I could say move 3 motors at once to make the end point go up and down, which is a totally different movement.
Yeah.
So that was all, it was a mature enough technology that they had some pretty advanced functions. And my job was generally, the machine's not moving like it's supposed to, go find out why.
Yeah.
and usually there's a feedback loop. It's kind of like, any other process. I talked about thermocouples and heat processes. Yeah. Well, in this case, there is something that tells you how far each motor is moved. And if you program it, you're saying we want each motor to go X number of ticks or X number of millimeters or whatever it is, and stop there, or wait, look for your next instruction there. And if it didn't get to where it was supposed to go, usually there was either a broken wire in the feedback to the transducer that said where it was, or there was a problem with the motor not getting the signal to move, et cetera. So it's just one of those things, is if something's not working, you say, well, what is it not doing, and trace it back, to the controls.
And what was it like building the iconic Mitsubishi Eclipse? I remember when the first Fast and Furious came out, that green Mitsubishi, everyone wanted that, and I would say still do. They're becoming a collectible item now. I mean, when I was a kid, I thought they were imported from Japan, but I didn't know they were made in Normal, Illinois.
Yes, they were. Absolutely. Matter of fact, I think they still have one modeled Eclipse, but it's not the Eclipse.
The Eclipse. Yeah, it's an SUV now. It's a fascinating trend to see a lot of automotive companies not rebranding it, but they're taking the brand from a car to an SUV, because Chevrolet is doing the same thing with the Camaro. Was a sports car for darn near half a century, and now it's going to become an SUV, I believe, in 2024. So there's a couple companies doing it. Because SUVs sell. It's the volume. Yeah.
There's an interesting story about the Eclipse. I mean, they were already in production or ramping up. I wasn't there at the very beginning, but I was there as they were still ramping up production. I think they were making about 200 a day when I was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was pretty involved. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was a parade that they were supposed to be in, and we would participate like Labor Day parade. I'm not sure. This was right before I hired in, and some of the guys who had some spare time, usually it was the maintenance guys who had spare time, because we were always waiting for something to break down.
Yeah.
And on the good days, we didn't have to do very much at all.
Yeah.
But some guys got together and said, we think there should be an Eclipse convertible.
Yeah.
And so what they did, because it's a unibody, which means there is no frame underneath, you can't just take the roof off, because it's part of the support.
It's structural, yeah.
So what they did is they got some steel beams, and they welded onto the bottom of a car. Then they cut the roof off, and they put it in the parade.
Oh, really?
And immediately it was like it caught fire. Everybody in the factory wanted to build convertibles, and a lot of people, Eclipse fans said, hey, when can I get one?
When's the Spider coming out?
Yeah, but it took a long time before the top brass, especially the Japanese, could wrap their heads around it being a profitable venture.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about, a lot of machinery going in, and eventually we got our way.
So what extra machinery was there? Because I know it sounds like it's an entirely different, you have to reinforce the bottom. I guess what additional machines or steps of the process did they have to add to that to make it come to fruition?
Yeah, that was interesting, because we had several models going down the main line. We had the Gallant, which was a four-door, and I can't remember the other one. It was a compact. We didn't do it for very long. And
Lancer?
It was before the Lancer. It was a small, and it wasn't a sporty. I can't remember what it was. But then there were also variations, because we also did an Eagle version of
the Eagle Talon.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
And a Plymouth version. And so each of those, with the robots, it was pretty nice that you could program, what variation or what model or variation is in front of me now, and I'll run the program associated with that. Yeah. We did that with the PLCs. The PLCs would receive from the previous station, it's model it's a Model 3, which was the Eagle. Okay, and then there was a series of other bits set in that word that said it's got a 4-cylinder or a 6-cylinder. It's got, whatever they are. And the minor part differences meant the robots had to move slightly differently to weld those in the correct way. But when the convertible came along, the problem was different. We couldn't get the right welds in the right places on all the parts we needed to. So we actually had to build a separate line for the area where we put the side bodies on the underbody. Really? So if you can imagine, the underbody is just the floor, the what holds up the motor, and the bottom of the trunk. Yeah. The side bodies then hold the doors, the side wells on the engine, and the side wells on the trunk, and also the wheel wells. Okay, so those had to be welded onto the underbody, and so we had a whole separate production line for that. Again, because the side bodies were so different, not having a top on them. And
so is that because the side bodies need to be more structurally reinforced?
Yes, they used heavier steel. There was a lot of reinforcement because we couldn't build it with steel beams underneath. That wasn't going to work. So they put thicker steel along the sides and also on the runners underneath so it was just a whole different model up to a point. Yeah. Once we got all that put together, the side bodies were on the underbody, and then we would send it down the main line with the rest of the cars. So we started using automatically guided vehicles, AGVs, to take it from the new production line and to an insertion point in the old production line.
Really? Yeah. So is that like a conveyor belt where the cars will go different parts of the factory based on the SKU or the SKUs of the variations to being convertible or hardtop? Or
right. Well, what we had, the automatically guided vehicle was basically untethered. It would travel down the aisle. There'd be fork trucks traveling down the aisle carrying things, and then here would come this vehicle moving on at a decent clip. You could walk next to it, but
really,
and it would, at the end of the one production line, a lift would pick the car up and drop it down onto the automatically guided vehicle. Once it cleared out of the way, then the vehicle would take off on its own and travel a path until it got to another area where it was lifted off of the AGV, put on a conveyor, and then that went into the main line. So,
really,
yeah,
that's awesome. I had no idea that existed back then.
Yeah, yeah.
How were those controlled, or was it automatic? So we go, from here, from point A to point B in the factory, or would you have to take into account variations, like if there's a pallet or someone walking in between, would it automatically know to stop, or what were the controls like on that?
Yeah, basically there is that. There would be a place where it stopped, where it could could put down its charging arms to charge the batteries while it was sitting there.
And it was battery powered?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah, automatically guided. It was
that's pretty cool.
Totally autonomous. And then there was a radio frequency transmitter that would give it the go signal or the stop signal or any auxiliary commands. Yeah. And but they were very simple. I mean, it had a very simple job.
Yeah.
Get the car, drop off the car. That was it. But it would also use light proximity sensors. It would break a light beam and to say I'm here, and
So that light being almost like a proximity sensor, where if someone's walking in front of it, it would notice it's being a blockage and automatically come to a stop or something like that.
Yeah. Then the other machine would say, oh, it's here. Yeah. So what do I do next? And so on. So.
That's incredible. It's such a legendary vehicle. I bet that's a rare, unique, really neat story. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, it was fun, especially the convertible. We really enjoyed building that one. And I don't think it was ever as profitable just because not the numbers.
The volume of it just wasn't high enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. but it was fun to build for a while. So.
What were a couple other variations, or rather, what were a couple of other things that were different about the convertible that made manufacturing it a little bit more unique, a little bit more challenging than the coupe?
Well,
the hard top.
The first thing that was challenging wasn't inherent to the car itself, and that was we had to build a new production line, and we were already full.
Oh my
in
gosh.
the building. It's like, okay, where are we going to put this thing?
Yeah.
You know, and of course the material handling people, we said, well, you're going to have to move all of that those stacks of parts that you have over there and put them somewhere else because we're using that space.
Yeah.
And eventually they tore down a wall of the building, expanded it, and then with the equipment they put in was pretty different from everything else we'd done. At that time, we were also transitioning to newer robotics. We went to the FANUC, FANUC is like the premier line of robots. At least it was for me when I was working before I retired. But they were much more evolved than the Japanese robots we had before. And
were they a little bit easier to program and perform maintenance on, or in what ways was it a little bit better?
Well, number one, the software that you would use to control it was much more advanced. The processor they used to control it was much more advanced. So troubleshooting was a little bit more like swapping parts, you know?
Yeah.
That's a lot of electronic techs I knew were just part swappers, you know? And so there was a lot less dealing with component level stuff. Is like, oh, it's got to be on that board, swap the board. And especially with the time constraints in a production environment, it's like they don't want you to trace it on a board. It's like, if it's on that board, swap the board.
Boss it.
Oh, yeah. And but the pendants were much more advanced. They were, instead of just a metal box with a couple buttons on top, they were molded boxes that had more buttons with more functions and much more advanced programming things. So you could say, I want this point to that point, you know, just now program it yourself. Here, just go. And it would do it. But so it was fun to get into the more advanced stuff while we were doing the convertible.
Absolutely. And then I think you were telling me earlier off air, that was your in a union environment, and your action. What was the interactions like with them that inspired you to start running for office?
Well, actually, I got involved in politics casually at first. You know, I guess if you want to talk about politics, I got to rewind a little bit because when I was very young, I didn't really understand politics. Like when Goldwater ran, I was 14 years old, and I just knew he is AUH2O is Goldwater, and that was it. That's all I knew about politics. Nothing. It was around the time of Carter and Reagan that I began to say, you know, what is this all about?
How does it work?
And as a matter of fact, I think it was probably during Ford or Carter, I saw a thing in the newspaper, the local newspaper, that had a bunch of questions. Answer these, it'll tell you whether you're Republican or Democrat. And interestingly, I found I'm not either one of those things. So, and it was 1972 was when the Libertarian Party started. It was formed then. And so it was around the time that Reagan and Carter were facing off that I was saying, maybe I should look into Libertarian because that sounds more like what I am. So, but then from then on, I was still just casual. It's like I read it in the news, you know, shake my hand at the TV screen and curse. But other than that, I'd go to work. And I worked overtime. You know, in the factory, especially in the maintenance, you always worked overtime.
Oh, yeah. Those machines don't take nights off.
Exactly. Or holidays or anything. So it was when I was at Mitsubishi, and I remember I was on third shift, and I had a lot of what I call labor Democrats. You know, the Democratic Party has several different factions. The labor Democrats tend to be of a certain mindset,
Oh yeah, was it I forgot, was it a UAW shop or
Yes,
United
it was
Auto?
UAW.
Yeah.
I was
Which is the United Auto Workers, which for folks at home is the biggest union for the automotive industry, which is used by most of the big three, like
Right.
Ford, GM, and all those folks.
right. When I was at Eureka, I was in the machinist union. Then I worked in non-union shops for a while. Then I went to Caterpillar, which was UAW, and then I went to Mitsubishi, that was also UAW. So I have a lot of experience in union shops. I didn't get involved in their politics much either, but certainly I was aware. I went to some union meetings, but I also had lots of interesting discussions with some of my colleagues. You know, again, they would bring their attitudes and perspectives from the Democratic side, and then there was rare but some Republicans in our areas too.
Yeah.
And I disagreed with both of them, and I'd get to where I'd start arguing with both of them, and you know, it's one of those things where you start thinking like, I should do something about this.
Yeah.
Somebody ought to do something, and it's like, well, maybe I'm the guy that should do something.
Yeah.
So that was about the time the Tea Party started to form, is when I really got interested in doing something.
Mm-hmm.
The first Tea Party was put on by Ron Paul in 2007.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was another one in Illinois, like that same year. I wasn't involved in that, but I was watching that, and my wife was getting interested in it. She was doing the same thing. She was yelling at the TV also, and we were both thinking, this is wrong stuff.
Yeah.
We need to change this. So she started getting involved with a group that formed post 9/11. It was called the 9/11 Project, and they were very conservative, and of course I was libertarian. There's some crossover there.
Oh yeah.
And so we were comparing notes, and she said, well, come to one of these meetings with me. And I said, okay. And then after that, I said, well, we're going to form a local chapter of the Libertarian Party. I want you to come to one of those meetings.
Yeah.
And my good friend Lupe Diaz was the founder, and he was always one that he would look at you and say, what are you going to do? Or he would tell you what you're going to do. So in our founding meeting, my wife Karen became the webmaster, and I was the secretary of the first iteration of the McLean County Libertarian Party in McLean County, Illinois.
Oh, that's awesome.
And at that point, it was just, let's go to the bar, have a meeting every month. Good excuse to go have some drinks and complain about politics.
Right.
But I told you, Lupe was one of those, is like, what are you going to do?
I like that.
And so he came to one meeting, and he started saying, okay, everybody needs to be thinking about running for office. And he literally was going, he says, I think you would be really good at city council. And he'd go to somebody else and say, we really need somebody to run for county clerk for the county, et cetera. And at that meeting, he was getting involved at the state level, and he came to me and he says, we have a problem at the state level. We need somebody to run for governor. I'd never run for office in my life.
Yeah.
I was sitting in the corner while he was pointing his finger at other people, thinking he's going to pass me over, and instead he picked me. And I said, well, I'll have to talk to Karen about it, and she and I did. And this is one thing that I think is very important for all the people who are thinking about getting involved, especially at higher levels. It's one thing to go to city council or to the county or something, but if you want to get involved at statewide or national politics, you need to have your family behind you. Mm-hmm. And so I talked with Karen about it, and we agreed that, hey, why not? Let's do this.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, I was still working 45 to 55 hours a week in the factory.
Oh, wow.
And I had no idea what was involved in a statewide race for governor.
Yeah.
But we said, hey, let's do it. And
What was the first step?
the first step was getting the nomination of the state party. Mm-hmm. So we went to, it was in 2009, we went to the state convention, and there were a couple other people that were interested, but they didn't present a good plan for campaigning. Apparently I did, so and again, I had no idea what I was talking about, but by golly, I put together a plan and they liked it. And so now,
is that something where the committee or the local folks vote for the nomination, or what was that process like?
That's interesting because for the Republicans and Democrats, they pick their nominees at their convention or at their primary elections. I want you to think about this.
Yeah.
The Libertarians and the Greens and the Constitutionalists, et cetera, we all pick our candidates in a convention that we pay for, attended by our party people, all right?
Yeah.
And our members, and we vote on who we think should represent us, okay? However, the Republicans and the Democrats, they do it through the primary system. And that means they're tasking all taxpayers to pay for their selection process.
Really?
Yeah. Nobody thinks about it that way, but that's what the primaries are all about, is the Republicans and Democrats picking their candidates that you're going to have to vote for in the fall.
Yeah.
All right. So so what I did, I didn't have to campaign then to the public like they do.
Yeah.
Trying to get people to come vote for their party. I campaigned to Libertarians, and I let them know that I wanted to be their candidate. And I can't remember how many people attended that. There were probably 80 or 90 people attended the convention in Illinois, and I got the majority. So
that's awesome.
And after that, it was panic.
Yeah. It's real now.
Yeah, it's real now. How am I going to do this? And luckily at that time, I mentioned it was during the Tea Party revolution that was going on. So interestingly, there were lots of rallies that were going on. People I assume in Texas they did the same thing, but I know in Illinois, all up and down the state, they would have rallies. And people would talk about the Constitution and limited government, et cetera. And it's like, that is a very libertarian position to take.
Yeah.
The problem was the Republicans wanted to co-opt that and take all those activists into their fold. I saw that.
Oh, yeah.
I warned Karen, I said, you watch. Within a year, these will all be Republicans. But we went around to all those rallies. We managed to get speaking time at all the rallies, and we were able to get our name out there, because, I mean, you're talking, hundreds of people at each one.
Yeah.
And then we also started going to county fairs and any other organized group that we could find. And at that point, then we started getting television interviews.
Oh, neat.
I was on a couple news stations up in Chicago. I live downstate, but we got in the major markets that way. So I had a lot of success getting the word out just because we were riding that Tea Party wave.
Yeah.
So a lot of fun.
Was that the primary source of campaign advertising? Was it the sit-down interviews with local news stations and going to the physical conventions?
Yeah, that was, I don't know if that was the primary. I mean, we bought radio ads. We did a television ad.
Cool.
Which we couldn't afford to put in the Chicago market, but it was all over downstate. So, yeah, I mean, we still were participating in the political process the same way Republicans and Democrats do, in that you beg for money, make promises, beg for money, and then spend the money on yard signs, flyers, commercials, whatever. And we were at a disadvantage to raise very much money.
How so?
Well, the Republicans and Democrats have stacked the political process in a way to try to keep out what small parties, or what they like to call them third parties. So the Libertarians in most states are not treated on an equal footing. We have extra hurdles to get on the ballot. If you want to, let's call it voter choice. If the voter wants to have the choice of a Libertarian, then they have to go through extra efforts to get on the ballot, or else they're excluded. And matter of fact, having a president on the ballot in all 50 states only has happened a couple times for minor parties. Each time it's always been the Libertarian Party. We're the third largest party in the country. In Illinois, every state has their own laws. In Illinois, we had particularly onerous hurdles to get over because the way to get on the ballot in Illinois is through a petitioning process. You have to go out and get so many signatures so your candidate can get it on the ballot. The number of signatures that you have to get is vastly greater than what the Republicans and the Democrats have to get.
Really? What's the delta, or what's that difference?
Well, I can speak to Illinois. Again, every state is different. Some are easier and harder. But in Illinois, a Republican that wants to go to Congress, for example, or run for Congress, would have to get 0.5%, the number of signatures equal to 0.5% of all the votes cast for the Republican in the previous election. Same thing for the Democrat, 0.5% of all the Democratic votes cast. For the Libertarians, it has to be 5%. Now, that's a tenfold increase, but it's not based upon Libertarian votes. It's actually based upon all votes cast. So
what?
So yes, so that number is not just 10 times; it could be 15 times greater than what it is for the Republicans and the Democrats.
So their number is not only the Libertarian Party; it's the Republicans, the Democrats, and the other parties too.
Yes, or of interest to people who are not Libertarians, independents.
Yeah, you
cannot run as a non-aligned person, especially in Illinois, but this is true in a lot of states, unless you're a millionaire. Because you need to be able to find people to get the number of signatures, go out and collect, and you have a limited window. In Illinois, it was 90 days to get.
That's it?
Yeah, in 90 days to get somewhere between 25 and 50,000 signatures, which I don't know if it sounds like a lot to you, but I'll guarantee if you're out there with a clipboard approaching strangers with this cold call, would you sign my petition so I can get on the ballot? It's a
challenge.
It's a big challenge. So a typical example would be, let's say there was an incumbent Republican in, let's say, the 5th Congressional District, just a random number.
Yeah.
The Republican would probably need to get 500 or 600 signatures.
That's it?
Yes, to get on as a congressional candidate. The Democrat, maybe 700 or 800.
Yeah.
But the Libertarian would have to get something on the order of 10 to 12,000 or more.
12,000
signatures
versus 500 to 600?
Yes. And remember that it'd have to be voters in that district. So if you're out there collecting signatures, now you're going to have to say, are you in my district? And most voters don't know. And if you get the wrong signatures, those are kicked off, and they try to challenge you to.
Do Republicans and Democrats have that limitation of the district as well, or is it statewide?
Oh yeah, they do.
Okay.
But because of these limitations and the hurdles, what happens is that the Republicans and Democrats are able to fundraise much quicker because they know that with the low hurdle that they'll be on the ballot. Yeah. And therefore, they can go to their donors and say, all right, I need to start campaigning now. And this is, for example.
So is that, sorry, really quick. So is that for sure, if you get 500 or if you hit that benchmark as a Republican or Democrat, once you hit that threshold, are you 100% guaranteed to be on the ballot as an option for a voter to choose?
If you're not being challenged within your party for that position, yes.
What do you mean challenged?
Well, I mean, again, they run in the primaries. So,
yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So once they get that 500 signatures, if they're unopposed, then they're on. If they're opposed, the other challenger needs 500 signatures, but the winner, then doesn't have to collect any more signatures to be on the fall ballot.
Oh, okay.
However, they know at the end of the primary election who their candidate is. Mm-hmm. That's the start of petitioning for the Libertarians.
So why is there that big time gap? Because that's a big disadvantage too.
Exactly. That's why. Yeah. Remember that the Republicans and Democrats made the law that is exclusive of the Libertarians. So, yeah, they put every little hurdle they can in the way. Mm-hmm. And so the Libertarians don't know at least until the middle of June, and due to the ability to challenge those signatures, a lot of times they don't know until late July or August if they're going to be on the ballot in November.
So even if they do,
so if you go to a donor and you say, I'd like you to help me campaign, they're going to say, well, come back in August and we'll talk about it. Yeah. Which by that time it's really late to be planning your commercials and buying your yard signs.
So all that takes time.
It does, and money. So by that time, most donors have already committed to one of the two big parties anyway. Yeah. So our donor base is small for those reasons. Now, it's also true that most media is aligned left or right.
Yeah, very true. It's hard to find a nice middle ground these days.
Yes,
unfortunately.
It is. I mean, my choice is to watch both because I don't have one that really represents me. That's
same. I always appreciate all the sides of the argument and all the different data. Yeah, exactly. So I always tell people, check everything out. See what speaks to you the most. I mean, always know what the other person's saying and thinking.
I know one of the challenges I had is when I did get before a reporter. Mm-hmm. One of the big things is, well, do you think you'll be on the ballot?
Yeah.
And my issue was, I want to talk about the things we need to do to fix the economy, to fix the state, or to fix the country.
Yeah.
Okay. I have very specific things on my platform. Let's talk. And no, they wanted to talk about, well, what are the challenges in running as a libertarian? And do you think you'll be on the ballot? And, by the time you get through the questions about your ballot access, you never get to
the substance.
Yeah. So our input into the national discourse has been minimized that way as well.
Yeah, and especially because some of those bullet points and some of those plans and ideas are what would attract people to vote for that, because a lot of people do want less interference with businesses. Just kind of a lot of people just like to be left alone in general, I would think, but. It's hard to get those messages out because I agree when I see a lot of these libertarian interviews, that is usually the reporter's main question is, well, what are the odds? What's the timing? What's it going to take to get you on the ballot? There's a lot less opportunity to talk about your initiatives, your plans, your goals, and your ideas that will really make a difference.
One of my pet peeves is almost to a person. They always ask, well, which one of your opponents would you choose?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't choose either of the opponents, or I wouldn't be running. But they want you. They want you to be, to endorse one of the major party candidates.
Yeah. It's like,
where does that come from?
If I wanted that, if I believed in that person, I would vote for I would be in their party. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but that's that's part of the mantle I took on as a libertarian, and because I do believe very strongly in it. And so I've been involved at the county level and then at the state level in Illinois. And it was while I was state chair. I ran for state chair and held that position for 4 years.
Oh, that's awesome. What was that like? And I guess for the folks at home,
that was very frustrating.
What's a state chair for folks who aren't too tuned into politics?
Okay. Well, all the parties have a structure within their states that in which they do the business of keeping the party alive, making sure that ballot access is achieved, organizing things across the state, trying to make sure that every county has an organized chapter or central committee or whatever the law prescribes in that state, and then also helping the candidates that do announce get resources to, now what we don't do is we don't fund campaigns for candidates. We don't do the work for them, but we get them in touch with volunteers who can walk for them, or
Is that another difference between the Republicans and Democrats?
That's basic
type of funding?
politics.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's one thing. A lot of people tell me we need to get money out of politics. It's like, you can't get money out of politics. There would be no politics.
Right.
If you didn't see somebody on the television, if you didn't hear about them, you didn't see them going door to door or sign a petition, they wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
There's no yard signs. There's no no recognition. Well,
Yeah.
those yard signs cost thousands of dollars. Guess what?
Oh, yeah.
So there is, and matter of fact, I used to kind of have this was years ago, a guideline in my mind. If somebody said they were going to run for an office, I'd say, they want to run for state senator. I said, you have $100,000.
Oh, my gosh.
Can you raise $100,000?
Yeah.
Okay, well, realistically, you can run, but you're not going to do anything. You want to run for Senate? Now, back then, it was, if you want to run for Senate, you need between $1 and $2 million. $1
to $2 million?
Yeah,
Oh
well,
gosh.
the very next election, both Republicans and Democrats in Illinois spent $5 million on theirs. So
A piece?
yes,
Oh, my gosh.
piece. And when I ran for governor, I spent $35,000. That's all I could
wow.
raise, and that
Yeah.
was spend in the time I had. Both of my major party opponents spent $10 million to run for governor.
Jeez.
Yes.
10 million.
Now, a lot of that comes from PACs and Republican.
Yeah,
There's a Republican governor's PAC, and there's
a lot of people don't realize there are limitations on how much you can individually contribute to a candidate. A lot of
Yes.
people are like, oh, yeah, I can just write a check for $1 million to, whoever. It's like, no, there's a limitation. That's why you have different mechanisms like super PACs. And just for the folks at home, what's a super PAC in layman's terms?
Well, basically, it's a organization that collects money from donors and then gives it to candidates, and they can give to, depending on how the PAC is structured, it could be structured to give to a single candidate or to a slate of candidates. Some PACs are such that you apply to them and say, well, I think I fit your mold and party, and they'll say, well, we'll see, and they dole it out to who they think is most successful. But the thing about that is then when the financial disclosure, because every candidate in every state has some sort of financial disclosure. If you run for U.S. office, it's the FEC, Federal Election Commission, and each state has their own for candidates that are within the state that aren't federal. Congress and Senate would be federal, but state legislature would be the state, whatever. I'm new to Texas. I'm still learning what that commission would be. Texas Election Commission probably. But anyway, when you disclose your finances to make sure everything's on the up and up, then it just, instead of saying Nicholas and Lex and Juan and Joe and Sam, it says the U.S. political PAC.
Yep.
And so you can hide who you're supporting. They say it's free speech, but we're hiding our free speech behind these PACs.
Well, I mean, and for some people, it's almost a necessity, unfortunately, because there are, political ramifications. If you donate to a certain person, your employer, that might come out and they might not like that. So I know a lot of people who they don't talk about their politics, and when they do donate, they do those routes specifically. So when that's released, no one can go, oh, hey, Bobby, he supported this candidate.
Right.
That's against our company. We got to fire him. And in most states, it's not politically, your politics aren't a protected part of firing someone. So they can do that. It's a real thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one thing that, another way in which libertarians are kind of disadvantaged, because if somebody supports us, then the Republicans are going to say, hey, we need that money, or we need that support.
Yeah.
And, oh, well, like I say, that's the burden that we've got on ourselves, and we're going to keep struggling until we break through.
Yeah. It's definitely a big challenge. It is a shame, especially if you tune into presidential debates and all those. I mean, it's a binary thing. I will say it's usually a boring debate between two people. And growing up as a, I say as adolescent, probably middle school and high school, and I was wondering like, oh, why are there only two options? Like, why isn't the libertarian person there at the debate to have that opportunity to present the ideas to the masses? Because in terms of advertising and getting the message out, those debates are crucial. That's where most people tune in. That's where we're going to see which ideas they like. They're going to surface to the top that they agree with, politically or philosophy, that they really agree with enough to cast their ballot for that person. And I can't remember, I'm not sure if there was last time a libertarian candidate had that opportunity. I think you were telling me earlier, a couple minutes ago, that there's only a couple times in history they've gotten on the presidential ballot.
On all 50 states.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I can't remember the exact number, but it's been the Libertarian Party. I don't think that the others have managed to do that. So in terms of the presidential debates, that's controlled by a commission that is 50-50 Democrats and Republicans.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It used to be ad hoc. For example, the League of Women Voters would invite who they wanted to, and a college, if they put it on, would invite who they wanted to. But it was in the 1990s. There was a fellow named Ross Perot got into the debates.
Texas legend.
And he ruined it for everybody, because that's when the R's and D's said, that's too much of a challenge for us. He took too many votes, and we don't want that to ever happen again. So they created this presidential commission, and they have put an iron lock on it ever since. So
he's one of my favorite entrepreneurs, as well as political figures. You can actually find the YouTube interviews from a while back where, he actually had to pay for that airtime out of his own pocket.
Yes.
And he had he was able to express a lot of his ideas very eloquently, and he would show you on the graph, like, basically, here's how you're getting screwed over by the government, and here's what we need to do, and here's why this North American trade agreement isn't equal. It's because it's different things are measured. I remember he was explaining one of the concepts in which we would manufacture something in the United States for $90, and we would send it to Mexico, and they would finish the assembly, and they would add maybe $10 or $15 to value, so now it's worth maybe $115. But then when they sent it back to the U.S., it would be counted as Mexico giving us an import of $115, but realistically, I believe you should be measuring the delta, because we made we put in $90 of value into that product. So that was one of the highlights I took away when I was watching one of his interviews a couple months ago. And unfortunately, since then I haven't seen a lot of options where they're given that opportunity to have that type of press time and really express those ideas out there.
And I think that hammers home also. He was rich.
Oh, yeah.
He could afford to buy the time. And the question that immediately pops up in my mind is, gee, are the most qualified only the rich people? Or isn't there a lot of people like you and me out there that have the ideas and the capability of doing the office, whatever the office requires? And the answer is not only yes, but emphatically yes, that probably the best qualified people will never, ever have any success unless they join the R&D machine. And I was thinking about this when you invited me to the interview, because I was wondering, well, why am I agreeing to this? Well, it's a big ego boost when somebody asks me about me, I think that's true. And that's something I recognized when I ran for office, is whenever I was invited to talk to somebody, it was an ego boost.
Oh, yeah.
But that's also how the R's and the D's kind of pull everybody into the fold. I saw it when a couple of Republicans came to me, because I told you about my governor campaign. I also ran two other campaigns, one for treasurer of the county and one for mayor of the town I lived in, Bloomington, Illinois.
Oh, cool.
And I was really proud of the mayor campaign more than anything.
Oh, really?
We nailed the issues and so on. And some Republicans came up to me afterwards, and they started patting me on the back.
Yeah.
And telling me what a great job I did. And the interesting thing is, I recognized something. I got that ego boost, right? But that ego boost, if I would have followed where it went, it had strings attached.
They were kind of inviting you to come out, hang out with us.
Yes.
Join the Republican Party.
Yeah. Come on, we want you to carry water for us.
Yeah. You'll have basically unlimited resources in comparison.
Yeah. And that's fine, but then I'm divorcing myself from basically the principled stand that I was taking already.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's like, beware.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you want to get into it, but a friend of mine argued against term limits to me one time.
Oh, really? Yeah. What
For
was
the
that
same
like?
reason. He says, if you're a freshman and you go into Washington, and first thing they do is they start patting you on your back. Congratulations, we love to have you here. It's great. It's great. Now let me tell you what you have to do.
Yep.
And then it's, one of the first things is now you have to go out and raise money to help us stay in power.
Yeah.
Okay. But his argument, my friend's argument against term limits was, what if there's all freshmen coming in?
Yeah.
Who's there? It's the lobbyists. They'll be patting you on the back and say, oh, you did a great job. We'd love to have you here. Now let me help you.
Exactly.
Let me help you.
But it'll always be there. That's very true.
Yeah, it is.
I do wish I like the idea of term limits though, just because you will get fresh and new ideas as you have, new and different candidates coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the hardest things in politics, and anything in life, even when it comes to like selling and technology, the incumbent is always incredibly difficult to displace. So that's why we see, go to DC, and there's a lot of people who have been there since, gosh darn it, some of them almost seems like a century, and it's just so hard to displace them because they have the position, they have the incumbent voter base, and they have those resources that we were talking about earlier, where they can just plaster the town with their name, and name recognition is a big part of politics. Is who do you remember? What are the one or two bullet points that really inspired you or really made you connect with that candidate that inspired you to give them your sign off, and they're going to put their ballot over to you. So
we have term limits right now.
Oh yeah,
it's called vote them out.
I thought you were going to say death.
Well, that's the other one.
It's like they get pretty old. Eventually, everyone passes away. It's very rare to see anyone in politics retire, which is another fascinating thing. Where maybe it's just because of the allure of power or the resources, but yeah, it's really hard to get new ideas into DC. And I wish there were more avenues, and that's part of the reasons I really want to interview you, just to let people know that there are options. You can really just find something that really speaks to you. I have a lot of diverse different ideas, some left, some right, and that's why I always feel kind of disenfranchised by the traditional political outcome or the traditional political process. Sometimes it's like, man, I wish there were a way to get those ideas out there so people they realize there are options, and with enough time, money, and energy, anyone can run for office. You can do it. It's just get those good ideas and connect with the folks so that they know it is out there. It's an option.
Right. And I would like to see politicians do the right thing, make it easier for people to get on the ballot.
Agree.
Regardless of your party, or if you're in a party.
Yeah.
Right. And now, if I want to go radical, I would say do away with the primary system altogether, because I, as a libertarian, don't like paying for Republicans and Democrats to do their internal politics.
So that's, if you don't mind circling back to that. So that's really interesting. So your party has to pay for, because I know putting on a convention or any event, that's quite capital intensive. So your tax dollars are support, or what do you mean by you're paying for their conventions, or what?
Well, they don't have a convention. They have a public primary. Mm-hmm. That means in order for them to choose that, the whole state of Texas has to put on an election. An election is not cheap to put on, okay? And it is also labor intensive. I mean, if you've gone to the polls, which I hope you have,
always, yeah, and
you see that somebody checks you in, somebody makes sure you get in line, somebody gives you the ballot, somebody takes the ballot. There's a lot of people doing this, okay? And there's a lot of money spent because you have to, make sure that the laws are being followed. There's training for the poll workers. There's making sure the facilities are available. It's even if there's not money spent at everything, there's a lot of displacement of resources, et cetera. Mm-hmm. All this is borne by the taxpayer. So as long as you're a Republican or Democrat, you say, well, that's okay with me. I don't mind.
Yeah.
But not all of us want to pay for the Republicans or the Democrats to do their internal politics.
Yeah.
So like you say, when the Libertarians get together, we rent out the hotel at our personal expense. We buy our rooms to stay there and buy our meals, et cetera. And then we conduct the business. You know, we make sure our bylaws are in place and look at our platform to make sure it shows what we believe in. And then we elect our nominees to go on the ballot.
Yeah.
And all that is internal politics. It's internal to our party. Well, the Republicans and Democrats should do the same.
Agree. Yeah.
Just
it would be more fair.
It'd be more fair. Yeah. It'd be a lot less burden upon the taxpayer and on the election structure in the state, and a lot less chance for corruption. Not that I'm accusing anybody of that, but you know. So why is it that we pay for a political party to do their business? Well, it's because they pass the laws. Now, hey, pass fair laws.
Agree.
So,
now, what do you like to do outside of politics or outside of the office?
I like to golf, but I also like to fish. I had a boat when I was running for governor, and it sat in the garage for 2 years and never saw the water. So,
oh gosh.
yeah. So I've since resurrected it. It's happy now. It's on the water from time to time, and but I'm trying to upgrade it because I bought my boat in 1999. Mm-hmm. Karen and I bought a nice boat because she was tired of sitting in a little skiff and us rocking all the time. So we got a nice boat, but I'm trying to upgrade it. I just put a new, excuse me.
Ours.
I got a new trolling motor and a new fish finder on it.
Oh, neat.
And I did the wiring myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, some of the wiring was already there, but yeah, I took the panels off. I laid down on my back. I shoved stuff through, something with electrical tape and a wire attached to it through, and then crawled around and pulled it around, so because the batteries are in the back, the trolling motor's in the front. And so I put a new fish finder. I'm using Garmin products, so they're pretty, they're big in the GPS area. And they also have very nice fish finders.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I mentioned to you that it was just a month ago I added a second fish finder. Yeah. Because when I fish in the front of the boat, I want to be able to see the fish there. But when I'm driving the boat, I need to be able to see how deep the water is, make sure I don't run aground. And it's also nice to kind of cruise slow and look to see if I see any rocks or bridges or something under that I can fish around. So I just added a new fish finder.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing to fish or fish to go after?
My favorite is bass.
Oh, really?
Bass and then crappies. Up north, we like to fish for walleyes a lot, but I don't even know if there's any walleyes down here or not.
Yeah. I used to go after pike when I was growing up. You go up to the Great Lakes and, those are the days.
Pike is good eating, too.
Delicious, yeah. You just need, and all you need, you don't have to worry about the bait. You just get a nice spoon lure and put on there and cast away and have some fun.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot of fun. My wife and I went to Canada one year, and we caught a ton of walleye and pike. But now I'm in Texas, and there's lots of bass water down here.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of options, too.
So,
well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh.
Thanks, Lex.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Don't forget, Topping Talks is also on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your enemies, heck, tell anyone. Just y'all stay safe. You have a great day. Topping Talks.